The kitchen smelled of rosemary and garlic, a warm, welcoming fragrance that seemed to linger in the air, as if promising comfort. Scarlett moved gracefully around the marble countertops, her fingers deftly chopping vegetables, her mind completely absorbed in the rhythm of the evening's preparations. The table was set, 2 glasses of deep red wine catching the soft glow of the candles. Everything was perfect, but nothing about the evening felt right. As she stirred the sauce in the pan, she glanced over at him. Alexander sat across the room, a glass of wine in his hand, his gaze fixed on the screen of his phone. His posture was casual, his smile polite, but it didn't reach his eyes. He wasn't really here, not with her. She had long stopped expecting grand gestures from him. Alexander had always been the man of quiet respect, not loud affection. Yet tonight, something gnawed at her. Tonight, when everything should have felt warm, intimate, the distance between them was sharper than ever. It was as if a veil had been drawn over the once thriving connection between them, leaving her with nothing but the cold silence of a marriage that had become routine. 3 years of marriage, and not once had she felt the rush of desire in his touch. He cared for her. Yes. He was thoughtful, always the first to ask how her day went, to bring home flowers when she was feeling down, to remember the little things. But that was it. There was no heat in his affection, no longing in his kiss, just politeness, respect, and the ghost of what might have been. Scarlett turned away from the stove, the simmering sauce bubbling in the pan as her thoughts simmered in her mind. She couldn't shake the ache in her chest, the quiet longing that had been building for weeks, for months, maybe even years. She was tired of being the perfect wife, of playing the role of the loving partner while silently craving something more, something raw, something passionate. As she turned back to the pan, she felt his presence before she even heard the soft steps behind her. Alexander was close now, standing just a breath away. She froze, her heart beating a little faster. And then, his hand, tentative at first, landed gently on the small of her back. It was a soft touch, so light she might have mistaken it for a breeze, but it felt like an earthquake to her. Her body stiffened. She could feel the heat of his palm through the fabric of her dress, the subtle pressure of his touch. But it wasn't just his hand on her back. It was the way his fingers trembled just slightly, the way the warmth of his touch seemed to search for something, as if it hadn't been there in too long. Scarlett's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't a caress. It wasn't desire. It wasn't the passionate embrace she'd dreamed of since their wedding night. It was just a touch. But it was a touch that carried with it a weight, a crack. Something fragile, something old, something she had never noticed before, but now couldn't ignore. She wanted to say something, to turn around, to demand an explanation, but her voice caught. For a brief, precious second, she allowed herself to imagine that maybe, just maybe, something was shifting between them. That this touch might not be an accident, that this might be the moment they had both been waiting for. But then, as quickly as it came, his hand pulled away, retreating as though it had never been there at all. He didn't say a word. Scarlett felt the absence of him more than she had felt his presence just moments ago. It was like a shadow left where a hand had been. The room felt suddenly colder. Her pulse was racing, her breath shallow. She turned to face him, her hands shaking as she wiped them on her apron, trying to mask the trembling. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander blinked, as though startled by her question. He dropped his gaze quickly, as if caught doing something he wasn't supposed to. The smile he offered was tight, unconvincing. "Sorry," he muttered, and then, as though that was all that needed to be said, he stepped back. He didn't even look at her as he sat back down at the table. His phone was back in his hands almost immediately, the silence between them growing thicker, more suffocating. She stood there for a moment, the weight of his apology lingering in the air. He had never apologized like this before, not for the distance, not for the emotional gulf that had grown between them, not for the lack of touch. It was always polite, always respectful, but never this. Vulnerable. The words were too simple for the storm raging in her chest. Scarlett felt something inside her break, a shift she hadn't expected. Maybe it was the touch so fleeting, yet so heavy with meaning, or maybe it was the absence that followed. But whatever it was, it left her with a sense of unease she couldn't shake. She picked up the wine glass in front of her, its contents reflecting the flickering light of the candles. The reflection in the glass seemed distorted, just like everything else. She felt like she was drowning in a sea of uncertainty. Was this how their marriage was always going to be? A series of polite exchanges, empty gestures, an endless cycle of routine. She longed for more. She had to. She couldn't live like this anymore. Not with him. Not with the man who barely knew how to touch her the way she needed to be touched. As she turned back to the stove, her mind raced. Had he been distant all along? Or was it her that had been blind? The sauce was almost ready, but Scarlett felt like she couldn't taste it anymore. She didn't even know if she could taste anything at all. The evening stretched on in an uncomfortable silence. Dinner was served, and though the food was perfect, the air between them was far from it. That night, Alexander went to bed early, as usual, and Scarlett sat in the dimly lit kitchen, staring at the empty glass of wine before her. The flickering candles cast long shadows across the table, making everything feel unreal, distorted. In the stillness of the night, Scarlett realized she wasn't just searching for a kiss, for affection, or for sex. She was searching for him, the real him, the man she had married, the man who had touched her tonight. Not with desire, but with something deeper, something scarred, something that needed healing. But the question hung in the air. Was he even aware of it? Or was she the only one who could see the cracks? And in the silence, her intuition screamed louder than ever. This was only the beginning. The mornings were always the same. Scarlett stood by the kitchen counter, the soft hum of the coffee machine filling the silence between them. Alexander was already seated at the table, a newspaper spread in front of him, his eyes skimming the words with the same detached focus he had every morning. She could have set the coffee on his side of the table, could have said, "Good morning," in the usual manner, but it would have felt like an echo, a ritual she had long since stopped expecting to be returned. The smile he gave her as she handed him his cup wasn't empty, but it wasn't real either. It was a mask of politeness, one that she had learned to recognize as his version of affection, his safe zone. It was as though he was afraid of letting anything else slip out, afraid that if he allowed himself to feel, to truly show her what was beneath the surface, it would break something he couldn't fix. She watched him for a long moment, the soft clink of the spoon against his cup, like a metronome in the quiet of the kitchen. He was kind. He always remembered her favorite coffee blend, always asked if she needed anything. But there was nothing more. There was no spark in his eyes when he looked at her, no warmth in his voice, no pull to his touch. In the back of her mind, the question was there again. Had she lost him, or had he never really been with her to begin with? The silence between them at the breakfast table had become so familiar, so much a part of their mornings, that it felt like the air itself had grown thick with it. But as Scarlett sipped her coffee, a sudden thought gripped her. Why was she waiting for him to change? Why was she still waiting for him to touch her the way she needed to be touched? She had been patient for so long, willing to ignore the absence of warmth for the sake of preserving their marriage. But was it enough? Was being there for each other really enough when all she wanted was to feel something real? "Are you going to the office today?" Scarlett asked, breaking the stillness. Alexander looked up from his paper. For the first time in days, she saw the faintest flicker of something real, something human in his eyes. He nodded. "Yeah, I've got a few meetings lined up," he replied, his voice steady but distant, like a man reading from a script. His gaze shifted back to the paper, and Scarlett felt the weight of it. She felt like a background character in his life, a spectator to his existence. She had never doubted that he loved her. She had never doubted his devotion to their life together. But love, as she was learning, could be suffocating when it lacked the one thing that made it feel a live connection. It wasn't until later that afternoon that Scarlett saw a crack in the facade again. She had been preparing a light lunch for herself when she heard the sound of the front door opening. Alexander had come home early. Scarlett's heart skipped a beat, not from excitement, but from the anticipation of what was to come. She wasn't sure anymore whether it was because she missed him, or because she was desperately hoping for some kind of sign, some kind of gesture that would tell her everything was still possible. She turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway. His suit was disheveled, his tie slightly loosened, his face a little pale from the stress of the day. But when his eyes met hers, Scarlett could have sworn she saw a flicker of something more than the usual indifference. Something raw, something like fear. I didn't expect you to be home this early," she said, trying to mask the sudden tremor in her voice. "I needed a break," Alexander replied, his words blunt. He stepped into the kitchen, but didn't approach her right away. He stood a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, looking down at the floor. Scarlett's pulse quickened as she watched him. There was a vulnerability in the way he carried himself, something about the way he avoided her gaze that made her wonder if he had been carrying this weight all along. He didn't look like the confident, successful man who ran an empire. He looked lost. "You seem distant lately," Scarlett said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. There was a long pause. She felt the familiar coldness of the space between them growing larger, suffocating. She could feel the weight of her own words settling into the room, and with it, the aching truth of their marriage. She had been waiting for him to see her, to feel her. But what if he couldn't? Alexander finally looked up, his eyes dark, filled with an emotion she couldn't quite place. It wasn't anger, nor frustration. It was something deeper, something more complicated. "I don't know how to do this anymore," he said quietly, almost to himself. I don't know how to want you. Scarlett's heart stopped. The words hit her like a punch to the chest. She had been waiting for something, anything, to prove that he still saw her. But this felt like the world falling apart beneath her feet. Alexander, she whispered, her voice trembling. What do you mean? He swallowed hard, stepping closer to her. There was a rawness in his voice now, a desperation she hadn't heard before. I've tried. Scarlett. I've tried to be the man you wanted me to be, the husband you wanted. But it's like I don't know how to love you the way you need me to. The confession hung in the air, heavy and fragile, and Scarlett stood there, stunned, as the pieces of their marriage, of their love, began to shift. She had always known that something was missing, but hearing him say it aloud, hearing him admit it, made it more real, made it more painful. I don't know how to touch you like that, he continued, his eyes darting away. I don't know how to give you what you need. The silence in the room was suffocating. Scarlett's mind raced. She had known. She had always known there was something in him that was afraid. But hearing him admit it so plainly, so vulnerably, felt like the moment everything could change, or everything could fall apart. She took a step closer to him, her voice soft, but resolute. Then teach me, she said, the words surprising even herself. We can learn together, Alexander. But we have to try. We have to want to try. As the evening wore on, Scarlett and Alexander sat in silence, the weight of his confession still hanging in the air. The distance between them hadn't shrunk, but something new was alive in that space now. A crack had appeared, a small one, but it was enough. Scarlett wasn't sure if they could fix what had been broken, but she wasn't ready to give up just yet. Maybe they could rebuild it, piece by piece. But only if he was willing to meet her halfway. Only if he was willing to reach out and touch her. Really touch her. In a way he never had before. Later that night, as she lay in bed, the quiet of their bedroom seemed louder than ever. She turned to Alexander, his back to her. The cool air between them now a chasm that felt impossible to cross. But deep down, Scarlett knew that if they were ever going to fix this, they had to face the truth together. It wasn't just about love anymore. It was about learning how to be with each other. Really be. And as the night stretched on, Scarlett closed her eyes and whispered to the dark, "Please, just try." The faintest of tears slipped down her cheek as she drifted into an uneasy sleep, haunted by the uncertainty of what tomorrow would bring. In the quiet of the night, the unspoken promise lingered. This was only the beginning. The house was quieter now, the hum of everyday life muted by the weight of unspoken words. Scarlett stood by the window, watching the rain fall in delicate sheets outside. It was a soft rain, the kind that painted the world in shades of gray and gave everything an almost dreamlike quality. She had always found comfort in the sound of rain. It reminded her of simpler times, of days spent curled up with a book or sitting by the fire with a cup of tea. But today, it only seemed to mirror the storm inside her heart. It had been 2 weeks since that conversation. 2 weeks since Alexander had admitted his inability to truly connect with her, to want her the way she needed to be wanted. He had promised to try. But as the days passed, Scarlett wondered if it was enough. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that something would change, that the touch he had given her in the kitchen, the one that had felt so unfamiliar, so fragile, was the beginning of something real. But deep down, she was terrified. Terrified that their love, like so many things in their marriage, was just another routine they would both go through, pretending that the cracks weren't there. In the days following his confession, things hadn't changed. Alexander had made an effort. Yes, he had tried to be more present, more engaged. He had initiated small touches, his hand grazing hers as they passed in the hallway. A brief kiss on the forehead before bed. But Scarlett couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too little, too late. She missed him. She missed the man she had fallen in love with, the one who had once looked at her with so much passion in his eyes. Now, all she saw was a man who was trying, but still too afraid to let himself feel. It wasn't just the lack of physical connection that bothered Scarlett. It was the emotional distance. She couldn't help but feel like she was living in a house full of people. His people. Her people, but no longer in a marriage. It was as if Alexander was more comfortable with the idea of being married to her than with actually being married to her. One evening, after dinner, Scarlett found herself standing in the kitchen once again, chopping vegetables for tomorrow's meal. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the sound of her knife against the cutting board. She had grown used to this rhythm, the quiet moments where she was left alone with her thoughts. But tonight, the silence felt heavier than usual. She could hear Alexander in the other room, on the phone with someone. He had been distant all evening, his conversation punctuated by the sharp click of his words, his voice terse, clipped. The tension in his posture was unmistakable, and Scarlett could sense it, the same weight he carried in the office, the same distance he kept from her. She had always admired his focus, his drive. It was part of what had first drawn her to him. But tonight, it felt like an impenetrable wall between them. She could almost feel the invisible barrier that had risen between them, like a fortress he had built around himself. And the more she tried to get close, the further he seemed to retreat. Scarlett's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the phone clicking off in the other room. She turned instinctively, her heart beating a little faster. She knew he would be walking into the kitchen soon, and a part of her wished he would just see her, see that she was standing here, waiting, hoping. But when he entered, he didn't look at her. He didn't even seem to notice that she was standing there. His eyes fixed on the papers in his hands, his mind still somewhere else. Scarlett swallowed hard, a pang of loneliness hitting her in the chest. "Everything okay?" she asked, trying to keep the bitterness from her voice. He glanced up, startled by the question. His brow furrowed slightly, but he quickly masked it with a small, tight smile. "Yeah, just work stuff." He took a breath, then added, "I'm just trying to get some things sorted." Scarlett nodded, but the words that followed seemed to hang in the air, unspoken, between them. "Do you ever get tired of pretending?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander didn't answer right away. His eyes seemed to focus on the floor, as if he couldn't quite look at her. She knew that look he was retreating again. "I'm not pretending," he said quietly, but there was no conviction in his voice. His words felt hollow, like he was trying to convince himself as much as he was trying to convince her. Scarlett could feel her chest tighten. She was standing in front of him, and yet she felt like she was speaking to a stranger. Then why does it feel like we're living in two different worlds? Her voice cracked on the last word, and she instantly regretted it. She didn't want to sound weak, but the truth was spilling out of her faster than she could control. Alexander's face softened for just a moment, but then he shook his head, as if trying to shake off the weight of her words. It's not that simple. Scarlett, you don't understand. She stared at him, a bitter laugh rising in her throat. No, I understand perfectly. You've been so caught up in your work, in your world, that you forgot what it means to be here with me, in this moment, with us. He looked at her, his eyes searching, but it wasn't the searching of a man trying to understand. It was the searching of someone looking for an escape. The silence that followed felt like an avalanche, heavy and oppressive. Scarlett took a step back, her heart thudding painfully in her chest. She couldn't breathe in the same space as him anymore. Not like this. Not with the distance between them growing wider by the day. I'm done. Alexander, she said, her voice quiet but resolute. His head snapped up, his eyes wide. What are you saying? I'm saying I can't do this anymore, she replied, her throat tightening. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I can't live in a marriage where I'm invisible, where I'm just here. I need to feel like I'm more than just a part of the background of your life. His expression faltered, and for a moment, Scarlett saw the cracks in his facade. But before he could say anything, she turned and walked away, not waiting for a response, not wanting to hear another empty apology. The following days were a blur. Scarlett found herself avoiding him, retreating into her own world. She started spending more time at work, throwing herself into the dishes, into the kitchen, into anything that gave her a sense of purpose beyond the empty walls of their home. But even in the chaos of the kitchen, even surrounded by the noise of chopping and stirring, she felt a sense of loss, of not knowing where to go from here. Every moment she spent away from Alexander felt like a breath of fresh air. But the emptiness that followed her back home was always there, waiting. One evening, as she returned to their apartment, she found Alexander sitting in the living room, waiting for her. He was no longer the man who had been afraid to touch her, nor the man who had hidden behind his work. Tonight, there was something different in his eyes, something more. Scarlett, please, he said softly as she stood in the doorway, still holding her coat. I can't lose you. I can't lose us. Scarlett stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. The man who had been so distant, so afraid to truly feel, was here, really here, waiting for her to decide whether she could still love him. And as the rain continued to fall outside, Scarlett realized something: the story wasn't over yet. The question now was, could they rebuild, or would the cracks be too deep to fix? The days that followed felt like a slow unraveling. Scarlett woke up to the same routine, the same quiet house. But it was different now. The silence between her and Alexander was no longer comfortable. It was charged, suffocating. Every word spoken felt like a tentative truce, a fragile attempt to restore what had been lost. Alexander was trying. She could feel that. But the more he tried, the more she felt herself pulling away. The space between them seemed to grow with every small gesture, every polite kiss on the forehead, every half-hearted, "How was your day?" It was as though they were both playing a game of pretending to be okay, afraid to confront the real issue that loomed over them like a storm cloud. Scarlett spent more and more time at work, finding solace in the bustle of the kitchen, where the chaos of chopping vegetables and plating dishes allowed her to forget the turmoil swirling in her heart. She could focus there on the sharp knife in her hand, the sizzling sound of food in the pan. But when she returned home, the emptiness followed her like a shadow. One evening, as she stood in the kitchen preparing dinner, she caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the window. Her eyes were tired, tired of pretending, tired of waiting for something that might never come. She had always prided herself on being strong, on being independent. But in this marriage, she felt small. It was as though she had lost herself somewhere along the way. And yet, despite the distance, despite the coldness that had settled between them, Scarlett couldn't help but still want him. She wanted him to see her again, to truly see her, not as the woman he had married out of duty, but as the woman he had once desired with everything he had. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Alexander was home early again. Scarlett's heart gave an involuntary flutter, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. She had to be strong. She had to be the one to stand her ground. He entered the kitchen, his face tight, his eyes distant. The smile he gave her was strained, forced. It was the same smile he had given her every day for the past few weeks, polite, but without warmth. "I've been thinking," he said after a long pause, his voice hesitant. Scarlett looked at him, her hands stilling on the chopping board. Her heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let it show. She didn't trust herself to speak. She had already said too much, too many times. He continued, his words slow, as though he were carefully measuring them. "I know I've been distant lately. I know I've failed you in ways I can't even begin to explain. But I want to make it right. I need to make it right." She met his gaze, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the man standing in front of her, the man who had been so distant, could still find his way back to her. But there was a part of her that was afraid that the damage had already been done. "I don't know if it's enough anymore, Alexander," she said softly, her voice steady but fragile. "I don't know if we can fix this." His face fell, and Scarlett could see the hurt in his eyes. She hated that she was causing him pain, but she also knew that she couldn't keep pretending. She couldn't keep living in a marriage where love had become an obligation, a routine. "I know I've made mistakes. I've been too focused on my work, on everything else but us. But I love you, Scarlett, and I don't want to lose you. I can't imagine my life without you." Scarlett felt a sharp pang in her chest at his words. But the pain wasn't from love. It was from frustration. She had heard these words before, too many times. The promises, the apologies, the desperate attempts to make things right. But where had they gotten them? "I'm tired, Alexander," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm tired of waiting for you to see me. I'm tired of trying to convince you that I'm here, that I need you to want me the way I want you. But you're always so far away, and I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this." The silence between them grew heavier. Scarlett could hear the sound of her own breathing, shallow and uneven, but it felt as though the world had stopped moving around them. Alexander's eyes softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he took a step toward her, closing the gap between them. His hand reached out, hesitant at first, but then steady as he gently cupped her face. "I don't know how to fix this," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. But I'm willing to try. For you. For us. Scarlett closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. She felt the heat of his hand against her skin, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. She wanted more. She needed more. But as she opened her eyes and looked at him, she saw the uncertainty still in his gaze, the same uncertainty that had been there for months, maybe even years. The doubt that he wasn't enough, the fear that he would never be able to give her what she needed. I don't know if I can keep waiting for you to change. Alexander, she said, her voice trembling. I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything will be okay when it feels like we're living in two different worlds. He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening, but he didn't back away. Instead, he took another step closer, closing the distance between them until there was nothing left but the space they shared, the space that had been empty for so long. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. I'm so sorry for everything, for taking you for granted, for not being the man you needed me to be. But I swear to you, Scarlett, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to fix this, to be the man you deserve. For a moment, Scarlett just stood there, letting his words wash over her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that he could change, that they could rebuild what they had lost. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just about him. It was about them, about their ability to meet each other halfway, to truly see each other again. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she reached up to touch his face. She could feel the roughness of his skin, the stubble on his chin, the warmth of his breath against her palm. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. I need more. Alexander, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I need you to be here with me. Fully, completely. I need you to want me not out of obligation, not because you think you should, but because you desire me, because you can't imagine your life without me. His eyes closed, and Scarlett could see the pain there, the pain of knowing that he had failed her, that he had let her down in ways he couldn't undo. But there was something else in his gaze now, a flicker of hope, a flicker of understanding. I'm willing to learn. Scarlett, he said, his voice steady. I'll learn how to love you the way you need. I'll do whatever it takes to make you feel wanted again. Scarlett stood there, her heart racing, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She didn't know if he could change. She didn't know if they could ever go back to what they had. But she also knew that she couldn't keep living in a marriage where she felt invisible. I hope you mean that, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, because I can't do this alone. And as she turned to walk away, she couldn't help but wonder if this was the moment where they either rebuilt or fell apart. It had been a week since Scarlett had voiced her doubts, a week since the conversation that left them both raw, vulnerable, and in a strange kind of limbo. Alexander had spent the days after their talk in an almost determined silence, not distant, but introspective, as if he were searching for the right way to be the man she needed. And Scarlett, she had watched him try, in the smallest ways, in the quietest gestures. But she still felt a wall between them, a barrier that she could not see, but could feel with every inch of her body. It wasn't enough to just hear the words, the promises. She needed more than just trying. She needed to know that he wanted to try. Tonight, they were supposed to have dinner together, just the two of them. It had been a while since they'd shared a meal without distractions, without the underlying tension hanging like a thick fog between them. Scarlett had cooked something simple, her favorite recipe, something that always brought her comfort. She had set the table, lit candles, and even put on a little music. She was trying to make it feel like it once had, when everything had seemed easy. But when Alexander walked in, his eyes weren't focused on her. His face was drawn. The lines deepened by whatever had consumed his thoughts that day. She caught the way his eyes flicked to the table, to the food, but didn't linger. His gaze quickly shifted to his phone, and Scarlett's heart sank. She felt it again, the distance. "Hi," she said softly, but it felt like the words were swallowed by the air. "Dinner's ready?" He didn't look up. "I'm not hungry right now," he muttered, his tone distracted. He moved toward the couch, setting his phone down with a little too much force. Scarlett stood frozen, the knife still in her hand, the taste of disappointment sharp on her tongue. She had prepared this meal not for the sake of the food itself, but for the moment, for the chance to be with him again, truly with him. But he wasn't here. Not really. It wasn't the first time. In fact, it had become the routine. He was always physically present, but emotionally. It was as if the man she had married had packed his things and quietly slipped away, leaving only a polite shell behind. And that was the hardest part. She wasn't sure what hurt more, him being absent while he was still physically there, or the constant push and pull of him trying to be something he wasn't sure how to be. The sharp click of the chair against the floor broke her thoughts. She turned to see him sit down at the table, his posture stiff, hands clasped in front of him. There was a silence that stretched between them, heavy and thick. Scarlett set the knife down, her hands trembling slightly. She had thought she could pretend that everything was fine. She had thought she could go through the motions, keep cooking, keep talking, keep pretending until one day it felt right again. But it didn't feel right. It hadn't felt right in a long time. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Alexander's eyes flicked to hers, but he didn't answer right away. He just looked at her, his face unreadable. For a moment, Scarlett thought he might say something, that maybe, just maybe, he would finally say what had been left unsaid between them for so long. But instead, he just nodded. "Okay, I'm tired, Alexander," she said, her voice breaking a little. "I'm tired of waiting for something to change, for you to change. I'm tired of hoping that one day you'll wake up and want me, really want me, like you used to. I can't do it anymore. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when it's not." His eyes dropped to the table, his fingers tapping nervously against the wood. She could see the guilt in his expression, the shame. He wasn't surprised by her words. He had known this was coming, and yet, the truth of them seemed to hit him harder than she had anticipated. "I don't know how to fix this," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. His words felt like a confession, not an excuse, but a truth that had been hanging between them, unspoken. "I don't know how to be what you need. I don't know if I can." Scarlett closed her eyes, her heart aching. She had been expecting this. She had been expecting him to back away, to retreat into the same emotional space he always did when confronted with the truth. And yet, hearing him say it still stung in a way she hadn't anticipated. The silence hung between them again, this time so thick that Scarlett could almost feel it pressing down on her chest. She wanted to reach out to him, to touch him, to somehow fix everything with the simple act of affection. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not until she knew that he could give her what she needed, not just physically, but emotionally. "I'm not asking for perfection," she said, her voice trembling now. "I'm asking for you to be here, Alexander, to really be here. I need to know that you're not just going through the motions, that you're not just doing this because you think you should. I need to know that you want me, that you desire me, that you see me as more than just a part of your routine." His gaze flicked to hers, and for the first time in weeks, she saw something in his eyes that wasn't fear. It wasn't guilt. It was something else, vulnerability. He was standing on the edge of something, teetering between the man he had always been and the man he wasn't sure he could become. She could see it in the way his shoulders slumped, in the way his lips parted, as if he were about to speak, but couldn't find the words. "Do you still want me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. The question hung in the air, sharp and urgent. Scarlett watched as Alexander's expression faltered. His eyes filled with something so raw, so unspoken, that it nearly broke her. "I do," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want you, but I don't know how to show it. I don't know how to be the man you need." The words were heavy, and they hung in the space between them, like a promise and a confession all at once. Scarlett felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest. She could see it now, the cracks in his armor. He wasn't the perfect husband, and he had never been the perfect man. But he was trying, and that, for the first time, felt like enough. "Then let's figure it out," she whispered. "Together." For a long moment, there was silence again. But this time, it wasn't the same suffocating silence. It was something else, something more hopeful, more open. As Scarlett looked at him, something shifted. She could feel it, like a spark in the air. She wasn't sure if they could rebuild everything, but she knew this: they both wanted to try. They were both willing to do the work. And for the first time in a long while, Scarlett felt like she was standing on the edge of something new, something that wasn't perfect, but something that could be real. It had been a month since that night, since the words between Scarlett and Alexander had been laid bare, since the truth had settled between them like a thick fog, both blurring and revealing everything at once. They had tried. They had both tried in small ways. But there was still a sense of unease, of something not quite right, lingering beneath the surface. Scarlett didn't know how to push past it. She didn't know how to fix what was broken. The mornings had changed. Alexander would greet her differently now, not with the same cold detachment, but with something softer, warmer. His touch had become less guarded, though still hesitant, as if he were waiting for permission to truly be present. He had tried to kiss her more, to hold her longer, to fill the spaces between them with something real. But even as they moved closer in their gestures, they were still a long way from the place where the connection between them had once been. Scarlett wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. There was a part of her that still ached for the man she had married, the man she had fallen in love with so deeply, so completely. She wanted that back. She wanted that passion, that fire, that effortless connection. But a deeper part of her was afraid that the fire they had once shared had burned out, that there was no way to reignite it. And yet, she still held on, just a little longer. It was late one evening when the quiet of their home turned to something else. Scarlett had come home from work later than usual. The kitchen was dark, the house empty, except for the sound of soft music playing in the living room. Her heart fluttered with a feeling she hadn't had in weeks' anticipation. She hadn't seen Alexander all day, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she missed him. As she stepped into the living room, she stopped in her tracks. Alexander was sitting by the fire, his back to her, a glass of wine in hand. There was something different about him tonight. His posture was relaxed, but there was an intensity in the way he sat, an air of quiet contemplation. He seemed more open, more willing to be present. Without turning, he spoke her name, his voice low and steady. Scarlett. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, a longing she couldn't quite explain. The sound of her name on his lips felt like an echo from the past, a reminder of when their connection had been effortless, when it had been easy. "I made dinner," she said softly, her voice just above a whisper. She felt suddenly self-conscious, unsure of herself. Was he still the man she thought he was? Or had the distance between them stretched so far that he was a stranger now? Alexander finally turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her stomach flip. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her, as if he were searching for something, for the right words, for the right way to reach her. Slowly, he set the glass of wine down on the table next to him, his movements deliberate. "I don't know what happened to us," he said, his voice quieter than usual, almost vulnerable. "I don't know how we got to this place, Scarlett, but I'm tired of feeling like I'm not enough. I'm tired of living like we're two strangers in the same house." The words hung in the air between them, a weight neither of them could ignore. Scarlett felt the sting of his confession like a sharp pain in her chest. He was tired. She had known that. But hearing him say it, hearing him admit how much he was hurting, hit her in a way she hadn't expected. "I never meant to make you feel invisible," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted to lose you." For the first time in a long time, Scarlett's heart opened. She could see it in his eyes now, the same vulnerability she had seen so many times before when they had first fallen in love. It wasn't the Alexander who was lost in his work, or the one who had shut himself off emotionally. This was the Alexander who had been buried under all the fear, all the pressure, and now he was finally breaking through. But she couldn't ignore the truth. They had both been wrong. She had let him pull away, let the silence between them grow. She had let her own frustration fester until it had become a wall she couldn't tear down. And he had let the pressure of his own world consume him, leaving nothing for her to hold on to. But now they had to face it. They had to face what had happened to them. They had to confront the wounds they had inflicted on each other. "I've been waiting for you to want me again," Scarlett said, her voice trembling. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I've been waiting for you to show me that you still care, that you still see me. But I don't know how much longer I can keep doing that. Alexander, I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending that I'm okay when I'm not. The pain in her chest was unbearable, but it wasn't just sadness. It was a mixture of frustration, longing, and a deep fear of losing him forever. She didn't want to walk away. She didn't want to lose the man she had spent years building a life with. But she couldn't keep standing in the same place, waiting for something that might never come. Alexander stood up slowly, moving toward her with careful steps. His hands reached for hers, his fingers gentle but firm as he took them in his own. His gaze never wavered from hers. I don't know how to be the man you want me to be, he said softly, his voice thick with emotion, but I'm willing to try. I know I've hurt you, and I know I've pushed you away, but I can't imagine my life without you, and I don't want to lose you. I don't want us to become something we're not. Scarlett's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just another apology. It wasn't just another empty promise. This was real. This was him truly seeing her, truly reaching out. Then let's try together, she whispered, her voice breaking as she stepped closer to him. Let's try to rebuild what we've lost. But it has to be us, both of us. No more pretending. The moment hung between them, fragile and delicate. But for the first time in so long, Scarlett felt a spark of hope flicker inside her. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic transformation. It was something quieter, something more meaningful. It was the first real step toward healing, toward coming back to each other. For a long moment, they just stood there, their hands intertwined, their foreheads touching gently. The weight of everything that had come before was still there. But now there was something new, something different, an understanding. I'm here, Alexander whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm here, Scarlett. I won't run anymore. I won't hide. I promise. She closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe them. She allowed herself to hope again. As they stood there, the quiet of the room felt different, softer, more intimate. Scarlett could feel the beginnings of something new between them. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be perfect. But it was a beginning. And that was enough. The morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows, painting soft gold across the kitchen floor. Scarlett stood barefoot, coffee in hand, watching dust motes drift lazily in the air. For once, the house didn't feel suffocating. There was quiet. Yes, but it was a gentler quiet, the kind that comes not from absence, but from calm. Alexander entered the room a few minutes later, still in his robe, hair tousled. He looked tired, but there was a softness in his eyes she hadn't seen in months. He smiled, a real one this time, and reached for a cup. Morning, he said. Scarlett nodded, offering a faint smile. Morning. They didn't need more than that. The air between them had shifted since that night in front of the fire. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. He was trying, and she could feel it not through words, but through presence. She'd found him one evening reading on the couch, his phone set aside, waiting for her to finish work so they could share a meal. He didn't fill the silence with apologies anymore. Instead, he listened. And when he touched her, it wasn't the hesitant, mechanical affection of before. His touch had weight now, a quiet intention, It was new ground for both of them. And yet, somewhere deep inside, Scarlett felt the faint hum of unease. Because love, once broken, didn't mend without leaving scars. And sometimes scars, no matter how faint, remembered the pain. That afternoon, Scarlett drove into the city for an early meeting with a restaurant investor. The proposal she'd been working on for months, a culinary concept built around memory and nostalgia, was finally gaining attention. As she parked, her phone buzzed with a text. Alexander. Thinking of you. Dinner tonight. She smiled, surprised. It wasn't the words that mattered. It was him reaching out first. Scarlett. You're cooking this time. Alexander. I'll do my best not to burn the house down. The simplicity of it made her heart ache. She didn't realize until that moment how much she had missed this, the gentle teasing, the easy rhythm of their old selves finding its way back. But the universe, it seemed, wasn't ready to let things be simple. That evening, when Scarlett returned home, she noticed something different. The lights were dimmed, the table was set, and soft jazz played in the background. For a heartbeat, her chest tightened. This was what she had always wanted. A gesture, an effort. Alexander was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, a small streak of sauce on his wrist. He looked up when she entered, and his eyes lit up. You're early, he said, a little breathless. Don't judge the food until you taste it. Scarlett laughed, the sound light and unguarded. I'll try not to. They ate together a little awkwardly at first, then more easily. He wasn't a great cook, but the food didn't matter. What mattered was the effort. Halfway through dinner, Alexander reached across the table and took her hand. His thumb traced small circles on her skin. The gesture was intimate, grounding. I was thinking, he began, his voice careful. Maybe we should get away. Just us. A weekend somewhere quiet. I want to spend time with you, without everything else around. Scarlett's heart lifted and sank all at once. A weekend away sounded perfect, the two of them. Away from the noise, away from their routines. But beneath the warmth of the moment, there was still a whisper of doubt. What if escaping only delayed what was inevitable? Let's do it, she said finally. And for the first time in a long while, she meant it. They drove upstate the following weekend, the road curling through forests dressed in early autumn. Scarlett watched the leaves change color through the car window, deep ambers, rust, gold, and thought about how seasons could shift so quietly, the way love sometimes did. Alexander had rented a small cabin by a lake. It wasn't extravagant, nothing like the world they usually lived in. But that was the point. The simplicity of it felt disarming, a reset. On their first night there, they sat on the porch with a bottle of wine between them. The air smelled of pine and distant rain. The silence was comfortable at first, but eventually, Scarlett broke it. Do you ever wonder, she said softly, what we might have become if we hadn't lost each other for so long? Alexander turned to her, the firelight flickering across his face. All the time. There was a pause. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, its surface still. But maybe, he continued, we had to lose something to learn how to hold it again. Scarlett's chest tightened. The truth of his words hurt, but in a good way. She leaned back, closing her eyes, letting the night wrap around her. The wind brushed her cheek, carrying the faint scent of rain and pine. For the first time in years, she felt the peace of being seen. And yet, even as warmth settled between them, a strange tension lingered. There was something in Alexander's tone, a subtle hesitation, that made her wonder what he wasn't saying. Later that night, when Scarlett stepped inside to wash the dishes, her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She almost ignored it. But something in her gut made her swipe open the message. Unknown. You don't know me, but you should ask Alexander about the night he said he was in Boston. Scarlett froze. Her heart began to pound, the edges of her vision narrowing. For a long moment, she simply stared at the words, trying to make sense of them. It could have been a prank, a wrong number. But the pit in her stomach said otherwise. She scrolled up, but there was no history, no previous messages, no name, just that single sentence glowing on the screen like a wound. The night he said he was in Boston. Scarlett remembered it instantly 2 months ago. He had missed her birthday dinner. He'd called late, voice calm, saying the meeting had run long. She'd believed him. She wanted to believe him. But now, the memory twisted in her chest like a knife. When Alexander came back inside, he found her standing by the sink, pale and silent, her phone still in her hand. He frowned. What's wrong? Scarlett looked at him, searching his face, searching for the truth in his eyes. Did you go to Boston that night? He blinked, confusion flickering across his expression. What are you talking about? Don't lie to me, she whispered. Please, just tell me the truth. Alexander's jaw tightened. He took a step toward her, then stopped, his mouth opening, but no words coming out. The silence stretched. Scarlett's pulse roared in her ears. Who was it? Alexander. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. It's not what you think. Then what is it? I wasn't in Boston, he admitted, his voice low. But it wasn't God. Scarlett. It wasn't about another woman. It was about me. The world seemed to tilt around her. She didn't move, didn't breathe. He continued, voice trembling now. I went to see someone, a therapist. I've been seeing one for months. I didn't want you to know, because I didn't want you to think I was broken. Scarlett's breath caught, the rush of emotions, anger, fear, relief hit her all at once. She sank into a chair, her mind spinning. He took a step closer, his eyes pleading. I was scared to tell you. I've been trying to fix myself before I could fix us. I thought if I could understand why I shut down, maybe I could finally give you what you deserve. Scarlett's throat tightened, the truth she hadn't expected, and yet, somehow, it made sense. The nights of silence, the hesitation, the guilt. Tears filled her eyes, but not from betrayal, from recognition. Why didn't you just tell me? Because I didn't know how. He said simply. She stood, moving closer to him. The anger was still there, but beneath it was something softer. Compassion. Next time, she whispered, her voice breaking. Just let me in. Alexander nodded, his hands trembling as he reached for her. She didn't pull away. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, echoing over the dark lake. Inside, Two people stood in the flicker of the firelight, holding on, not to perfection, but to truth. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The storm had passed overnight, leaving the world washed clean and soft. The morning air around the lake carried the smell of wet pine and soil, and light rippled gently across the surface of the water. Scarlett sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, a mug of coffee cradled between her palms. Inside the cabin, she could hear Alexander moving quietly, the soft creak of the floorboards, the hum of the kettle. There was something comforting about the domesticity of it, the sound of him, existing in the same space without tension. For the first time in a long while, it didn't feel fragile. Last night had shaken her. The message, the confrontation, the truth. It had cracked something open inside her, not just the fear of betrayal, but the realization of how little they had both allowed themselves to be seen. She had spent so long trying to make him open up, to pull him closer, that she hadn't realized how much she had been holding back herself. Her anger, her longing, her exhaustion, all of it locked away behind pride and fear. And him, he had hidden behind silence, behind his own brokenness, trying to fix himself in the shadows instead of beside her. Now the truth was bare, messy, imperfect, but real. The screen door creaked open. Alexander stepped out, 2 cups in hand. His hair was damp, his white shirt wrinkled, and yet he looked at her with a softness that made her chest ache. "I made you fresh coffee," he said quietly. Scarlett looked up at him, eyes tired but gentle. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said, sitting beside her. "But I wanted to." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. The quiet between them was different now, no longer heavy, no longer strained, just quiet. Scarlett turned her head, studying him. His face looked older in the morning light, not in years, but in weariness. There were faint lines around his eyes she hadn't noticed before, the kind that come not from age, but from living, from trying. "Did it help?" she asked finally. He turned to her, puzzled. "The therapy." She nodded. He hesitated before answering, as though choosing his words carefully. "It helped me see that I wasn't protecting myself from you. I was protecting myself from feeling." He gave a faint, rueful smile. "Turns out, being numb is easier than being honest." Scarlett exhaled, the truth of that hitting deep. "Yeah, I think I know that feeling." He looked at her, then really looked, and something passed between them. Not an apology this time, not guilt. Understanding. The kind that only comes when 2 people finally stop talking around the truth and let it exist between them, unpolished and human. "I didn't want to lose you," he said softly. "You almost did," she whispered. He nodded, accepting the words like a verdict he deserved. They spent the rest of the day in quiet companionship, cooking together, walking by the water, sometimes not speaking at all. It was the kind of silence that felt earned. That evening, as dusk began to settle over the lake, Alexander built a small fire outside. Scarlett joined him, 2 glasses of wine in hand. They sat on the wooden steps of the porch, the flames flickering in the reflection of their eyes. "Do you remember?" Scarlett began, her voice low. "The first time you touched me?" Alexander smiled faintly. "In the kitchen, You were making pasta. I was pretending to help. You were terrible at it. I was nervous. He admitted. You made me nervous. Scarlett laughed softly, but her eyes glistened. You know, I used to think that moment meant everything, that one touch could hold a promise forever. And now, he asked, now I think it was just the beginning of a promise we didn't yet know how to keep. He fell silent, letting her words sink in. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth. Scarlett watched the fire dance, her mind tracing the arc of their years together. The laughter, the silence, the breaking and rebuilding, every version of them that had existed until now. Finally, she said, I'm not looking for perfect anymore. I just want real. The kind of love that breathes and changes, and sometimes hurts, but still stays. Alexander reached for her hand, his fingers trembling slightly. Then that's what I want to give you. Not perfect, just real. Their eyes met, no grand declarations, no cinematic kiss, just two people seeing each other clearly for the first time in years. The following weeks moved like slow sunlight. Back in the city, they slipped into new patterns, not the old routines of distance and avoidance, but something quieter, more intentional. They ate breakfast together. They left notes on the counter, simple things, coffee's ready. You looked beautiful this morning. Miss you already. Alexander still saw his therapist, but now he didn't hide it. Scarlett didn't ask what they talked about. She didn't need to. What mattered was that he was learning to speak to her, to himself. And Scarlett, too, had changed. She began writing again, something she hadn't done in years. Recipes at first, then small essays, fragments about love and fear and rebuilding. She poured her emotions into words the way she used to pour them into food. Sometimes, when she cooked, Alexander would come up behind her, his hand brushing her hip, his lips grazing her neck. The first time he did, she froze, memory and surprise colliding, but then she melted into him, the warmth of his body grounding her. The distance that had once felt insurmountable now seemed like something they had learned to walk across together. One morning, months later, Scarlett woke before dawn. The city outside was still dark, the sky a faint shade of gray. She reached for the space beside her, empty. For a heartbeat. Panic flickered in her chest, the old fear of absence returning. But then she heard it, the faint clatter of pans, the scent of coffee and something sweet wafting from the kitchen. She smiled. When she walked in, Alexander was standing over the stove, hair messy, concentration fierce. There was flour on his forearm and sugar on the counter. You're making pancakes, she said, amused. He turned, sheepish, trying to. They might kill you. She walked over, looping her arms around his waist. Then I'll die happy. He laughed, really laughed, and the sound filled the room with light. For a long moment, they just stood there, breathing in sync, the smell of coffee and batter wrapping around them. And Scarlett realized something then. Love wasn't the grand gestures. It wasn't the apologies, or the promises, or even the passion. It was this, the ordinary mornings, the quiet persistence, the choice to stay. Later that day, they sat on the balcony, the city below humming with life. Scarlett rested her head on his shoulder, her fingers entwined with his. Do you ever think about the beginning? She asked softly. Every day. he said. But I think more about what comes next. She smiled, her heart full. What do you think that is? He turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Us, still learning, still trying, still choosing each other. Scarlett closed her eyes, letting his words settle into her bones. The past would always be part of them. The mistakes, the silences, the pain, but it no longer defined them. What mattered was the present, the fragile beauty of a love rebuilt. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting their faces in gold, Scarlett thought of how far they had come from distance to closeness, from silence to speech, from fear to tenderness. The woman who once waited for him to want her now understood that love wasn't something you waited for. It was something you built. And as Alexander pressed a gentle kiss to her temple, she whispered to herself a quiet vow, a reminder. Real love doesn't return to what it was. It becomes something new. She looked at him, her husband, her almost lost, her found, and smiled. Outside, the world moved on the sound of traffic, the laughter of strangers, the city breathing. Inside, in the small, imperfect quiet of their kitchen, love was alive again.